Ahoy, shipmates, and welcome to a ShipWrekt re-recording. For those of you who have listened to our Black Sea Lost Victories offering, we kind of talked about USVs, uncrewed surface vessels, and the Russian Navy's inability to deal with this threat. But I thought it would be quite good if we just went into the weeds a little bit more about protecting ships from these small uncrewed vessels. Unfortunately, after we recorded it, it was noticed that I sounded like I had a couple of balls in my mouth. So our producer, Anna, she played around with it, but it wasn't really working for us. So hopefully this will come out fine. If I again sound like I've just been to the dentist, right, you'll just have to deal with it because we can't keep recording. Now, of course, this being a ShipWrekt podcast, we have alcohol with us. And I've got something rather special here on the go, the Royal Bracklet 21-year-old whiskey. Now, for people who don't really know a lot about whiskey, they tend to see higher age statements as indicating it's a better whiskey. Trust me, this is not the case. It's really not. There are phenomenal whiskies 10 years old out there. And there are whiskies 21, 25, 30 years old that you wouldn't want to pay 30 quid for, to be honest with you. So it's always a bit of a gamble. Now, the thing with this Royal Bracklet was when I was in Gibraltar, it was on a down price from about £200 in the UK, 120 across there. So I thought, hey, why not treat myself? It's a prestigious name. The distillery was founded in 1812. And it's likes to sort of talk about itself as the royal whiskey. 3 sherry casks are used: Oloroso, Palo Cortado, and Pedro Jimenez. It's non-chill filtered, no added colour, so that's good. But it ain't cheap. I like it, but I keep going back to it, and I'm sort of, it's nice, but is it worth that amount of money? I mean, on the nose, it's very Bunnahabhain 12, lots of spicy Christmas cake, big sherry overtones, pipe tobacco, a cigar box. I mean, in the glass, it's gorgeous, really good. You know, if you spend time with it, you start to pick out spices, raisins, vanilla. I get a lot of dark pepper, baked bread. Really big vanilla hit if you go deep into the glass. And like the Bunnahabhain 12, it is Christmas in a glass. It's just sumptuous. On the taste, well, sweet, remains sweet. It's got a very nice, dry, almost wet paper undertone. No smoke. I'd say a little bit of barrel spice in there. It's quite syrupy, but after a few seconds, it goes a bit watery. It feels like it's been proofed down a little bit too much for me. And a little bit the character has been lost. But here's the thing, all right? This whiskey, on departure, it drops off a cliff. Now, don't get me wrong, I like it. It's balanced and it's soft and it's very drinkable. It's definitely what I'd call a dessert sort of whiskey. But towards the end of the experience, it's just gone in a flash, and very little remains. So if you want a easy, soft going, sweet whiskey experience, buy this. If you want a sherry monster that's going to rock you back on your heels and spank your backside, Edredor 10, or even better, the signatory independent bottling of Edredor. So, you know, it's good. Is it worth 200 quid plus? I don't think so. I think it's a bottle that people who think of whiskey in terms of names would like on the rack because it looks very pretty. But to be honest, for that kind of money, I could probably get 3 bottles of something else that'll rock my world a bit more. The one thing I would say is it's going excellently with this Brickhouse Mighty Maduro. They complement each other really well. And I'm quite surprised at that because I thought the Maduro would kind of dominate this whiskey utterly. Okay, so there is your whiskey review. Black Sea uncrewed surface vessels, they've been playing havoc with the Russian Navy. They was utterly incapable at the onset from dealing with these, and they've really pushed back the Russian Navy east. And one of the counters to this is gunnery, close range gunnery. Just a reminder, when we talk about these things on the podcast, just remember that our aim is not to hit Wikipedia and NavWebs, etc., and just give you a rehash of stuff that you can all read online. Right? The beauty of this podcast is people who've been there, seen it, done it, and that includes me. Even though I joined the Royal Navy as a radar operator in 1995, I rather foolishly decided to believe a hype, and I retrained into the new above water warfare branch of the Royal Navy. That was taking all the old ops departments, sonar, radar, gunnery, electronic warfare, mine warfare, and trying to combine them with the weapons electrical branch, while simultaneously cutting down the training in all of it so that you learned a lot less, but you had to do a lot more. An abject failure, probably one of the biggest failures the Royal Navy's had in terms of manning for decades. I entered the branch at the start, and I was very lucky that after training at HMS Collingwood, on the utterly throbbing to death maintainer side of it, which I was no good at, I hated, I barely scraped through, we went down to HMS Cambridge. It's long gone now. It's fields in a very pretty place called Wembury, not far from Plymouth. And there, you would learn gunnery, and we had a 4 to 5 week course. We were extremely fortunate that there was a lot of ammunition knocking around. There weren't many courses going through, and it was before they trimmed down the course even further. We fired everything. So I qualified in 20mm Oerlikon 7 Alpha, 20mm Gambo, single and twin 30mm. I then qualified as missile gun director visual, local aiming sight, and also got a bit of gun bay training in, which is for the big gun, the 4.5-inch Mark 8. We went down into the magazine just because they needed to get some rounds away and refresh loading the gun and keeping it going. So I do not claim to be a gunner. Before you ex-HMS Cambridge rates chime in, send me angry emails, DMs, say you are not a gunner, you did the OMAWW course. Absolutely right. I am not entitled to wear the gunnery badge, the Jedi badge. However, I did qualify in all these weapon systems, and I did an awful lot of live firing against surface targets and air targets. Close range gunnery. Right. Close range gunnery kind of falls in and out of favour with the Royal Navy, in fact any Navy, according to the perceived threat. So when we were undergoing the steam battleship revolution, ships started carrying big muzzle loading guns. Then they went to breech loaders. These were found to be somewhat unreliable sometimes. The breech pieces would fly out occasionally and fly across the deck, taking anyone unfortunately stood behind them with them. And then these things called torpedo boats and torpedo boat destroyers arrived on the scene. Carrying torpedoes, which was a new wonder weapon, they were an existential threat to the capital ship. And for capital ships, close in defense against these became extremely important. And what you'll see is, if you have a look at black and white photos of battleships in the 1880s, 1890s, maybe 1900, the upper decks are covered in 3 and 6 pounder guns, Maxim machine guns, Nordenfeldts, associated searchlights started appearing, and the old fighting tops, which, you know, the Battle of Trafalgar, HMS Victory, you would have people with muskets up in the fighting tops. These started to carry these small rapid firing cannons. After World War I, there continued to be an interest in close range, but it was more sort of centered on the air threat. So the Royal Navy in particular went for the multi-barrel 2-pounder pom-pom gun, the quad Vickers, and the American Navy went, of course, with the quad 1.1-inch And by the end of World War II, we see ships absolutely festooned with 20 mil, 40 mil, new director aiming sights, and fire control radars bolted onto the old directors. Cold War, we see close range weapons all out of favor again, primarily due to the perception that the missile threat was the primary threat now. There was some interest after the war. If you have a look at one of the sources we supply in picture 2, there's a picture of the British 6-inch N5 and the 3-inch N1 guns on HMS Tiger, HMS Blake, and HMS Lion. But these were kind of considered to be a bit of a dead end. As it transpired in 1982, especially in San Carlos water, HMS Blake or HMS Tiger at one end of the anchorage with these guns would have been an absolute godsend. In fact, you could say that any ship carrying two 2-pounder pom-poms from World War II would have been welcomed with open arms in 1982. But we decided prior to then that you didn't need close-range weapons. So 1982, some very hard lessons. We're going to do a podcast about that soon. And you go from a couple of 20mm guns on frigates and destroyers just to, stop fishing vessels that refuse to stop, real gunboat diplomacy. Suddenly, these weapons are appearing all over the shop. So, to give you an example, 1982, a Type 42 destroyer in the task group would have a pair of 20mm Oerlikons, and then whoever was spare on the upper deck, probably just with self-loading rifles and even 9mm submachine guns. A Type 42 down the Gulf in 1991, 4 20mm Gambos, 2 Phalanx close-in weapon systems, 20mm, 4 general-purpose machine guns, and a Royal Marine detachment with a couple more GPMGs and some man-portable air defense missiles. So the wheel turned. There were a lot of rush modifications. You saw ships' boats being taken off and replaced by mounts. And that was kind of the state of affairs for the next 10 years. The Royal Navy didn't just stick with the Phalanx close-in weapon system. They also went for Goalkeeper. And then late 2000s, well, what do you know? The wheel turns. We start to see 20mm Gambo removed from warships. HMS Cambridge School of Gunnery closes. No more live firing when you're on course, right? You had to join your ship and you had to hope there was some spare ammunition. Reasons, well, the Royal Navy will tell you because there was a reassessment of the threat, etc. The bottom line here is there was a thing called lean manning came in. We couldn't recruit enough people into the Royal Navy, and therefore there simply weren't enough people on board a ship to man all these close-in weapon systems. That's the bottom line here. Fast forward to the Ukraine-Russia war, and oh my lord, uncrewed aerial vessels and uncrewed surface vessels are turning that wheel yet again. They're cheap, they got good range, and in hostile hands, like Russia or the IRGC and of course the Houthis, these systems are posing real threats to naval forces. So in this short episode, because Black Sea Lost Victories was a very long project, and unfortunately time requirements necessitated us briefly touching on some aspects, I want to look a little bit more into this uncrewed surface vessel threat and walk you through some of the successful attacks on Russian ships and talk about the countermeasures. So, spark up a smoke, grab a drink, and let's crack on. Ukrainian uncrewed surface vessels. They've got quite a few, but we'll take the Magura 5, which there is a picture of in the sources. It's 5.5 meters long, 1.5 meters wide, 50 centimeter height above the sea. So it's low observability visually, and it's going to have a very low radar cross section. It's got a range not far under 1,000 kilometers. So this isn't just an inshore weapon. This isn't just a literal environment weapon. The payload can be up to at least 320 kilograms. So you might be looking at high explosive fragmentation warhead on remote command or point detonation, a remote weapon station with, say, a 12.7mm machine gun. It could carry light anti-tank guided weapons or multi-role munitions like Martlet or Brimstone, RPGs, possibly mines, and of course, in one of the latest iterations we've seen, surface-to-air missiles. We've seen a photo of one carrying 2 Russian AA-11s. It's got a uplink downlink for command with inertial nav system, GNSS, day and night optics, possibly radar absorbent material paneling. That's not confirmed, but I wouldn't be surprised. And my gut feeling is these have got some kind of armor on them, probably Kevlar. And the reason I say that is when you have a look at the videos, a couple of them that we'll talk through, the amount of small arms being put down by Russian gunners usually doesn't seem to set them off. So that says to me there is some kind of protection built into these, at least over the frontal arc. So some quite simple whiskey. That's very nice, very sweet. So you can use these for reconnaissance or attacks. We see them operating in packs. Usually they'll keep one back for a post-strike assessment. They appear to be positively controlled and coordinated all the way through the attacks on Russian ships. Why is that important? Because electronic warfare, jamming the uplink downlink, should be something that the Russians can do. We always assumed that they had extremely powerful jammers. And of course, if you jam the command link for one of these, unless it's able to operate autonomously, it's not under your control. Ukrainian tactics are to mug the target. So they go after a ship from both beams. Their preference seems to be for mobility kills first. So they'll go for a main machinery space. Then they'll often send another one into the hole already created. This creates massive asymmetrical flooding because you do not want to be flooding in a machinery space. They're big, right? They're probably the biggest spaces on board a warship. And asymmetric flooding means that all the water, your flooding is concentrated to one side. That's going to destroy your metacentric height. That's going to induce roll. And then once you're over, you're on your beam ends and then you're upside down. The other thing that they have done is go for a transom here. This has 2 effects. So hitting on the back end is a mobility kill because you'll probably destroy the steering gear compartment and the rudders. Also, the shot is going to displace the shafts on the propellers. They will vibrate as they're turning rapidly. That will blow the seals, and then you're going to get huge flooding into an engine space. Interestingly enough, that's what happened with HMS Prince of Wales when she was sunk in World War II. A torpedo hit in the vicinity of a propeller shaft bracket. That went, the shaft started spinning uncontrollably, warping the shaft seal space, and that caused huge flooding in one of the engine compartments. But now we're seeing missiles on these things, probably remote weapon stations. I would expect future tactics to be a mixture of, say, 12.7 and short-range anti-armor missiles, and simply ones equipped with point or command-detonated warheads. And they'll come in under a screen of lightweight missiles. 1 or 2 might sail around a target rapidly, just peppering it with rounds, and then the others will come in and go for your positive hits. I'm really looking forward to seeing Brimstone or Martlet on these things. That's going to be another massive leap in capability. So in short, what are they? Well, they're low radar cross-section targets. They present a low visual aspect, especially in poor weather. They will probably, if not already, be coated in radar absorbent material, maybe lightly armored. They can carry standoff munitions. They can swamp the close-in defenses of a ship, and that's really severely restricts your maneuvering options. If you're the officer to watch, they can form ambush lines, hunting packs. They can shadow ships or groups of ships that might be operating under emission control, so their own radars will be off. They've got good endurance, and of course, they're cheap. The threats that these pose, oddly, are very much the same as the Victorian Navy wrestled with as the torpedo boat threat came about. Early detection, effective cooperation and coordination between ships, effective coordination of searchlights and close-range weapons, and accurate volumes of fire. It's really interesting how the problems of 1900 are now being reflected in 2025. But you got to remember, even though these things are being touted as game changing in the maritime world, we shouldn't really have been caught out by this, because these things are not new. World War One, the Germans had the FL boot, 17 meters long, 40 knot speed, remotely piloted vessel, used an aircraft that relayed instructions to the shore operating center, carried a massive warhead on these things, and they were a real threat to the Royal Navy monitors who were off the Belgian coast carrying out shore bombardment duties. World War II, HMS York was a write-off, constructive total loss at Crete, having been struck by Italian small attack craft. They weren't really remotely piloted. What you had is a crew, one or two guys, and then they motored up, and then when they saw a target, put the revs on and then jumped over the side. But finally, 2017, that Saudi frigate, Al Medina, was it? Clear day, fantastic visibility, really acting like idiots, heads up their arses, steaming along quite happily, and a IRGC supplied USV snuck up on them and hit her on the port quarter, I think. So, the writing has been on the wall with these for a very, very long time. And yet again, we're kind of suddenly waking up to the threat. And it's a threat that's always been there. So how do you counter these things? Well, as with all threats to warships, the best solution is to attack where they come from. Hit the operating bases, hit the command and control nodes. Electronic warfare, jam the uplinks and downlinks. That's going to work for us until these things become fully autonomous. But at the moment, as I said earlier, the real surprise is how ineffective Russian active jamming has been. Good early radar detection. That's going to be by either your ship, you're embarked, or supporting helicopter or fixed wing. But as you've seen, these things are very small, so you're going to need good moving target indication and good track extraction on your radars. And we know the Russians simply do not have that. There is no indication whatsoever that their surface search radars are in any way effective at picking up these small craft. Good early visual detection, not just by the aircraft, but by people on the upper deck. Now, one of the fascinating things is, we'll just go off track here, the Russian Navy had periscopes on board warships. So on the bridge, they would have a big periscope, and I suspect the officer of the watch would use that for early identifying surface contacts. I'm a big fan of that. It's something the Royal Navy did right up until the 50s, I think, with the Type 14 frigates. But as Tim LG, my fellow presenter on here, will confirm, there's nothing more annoying than your surface picture supervisor in the ops room constantly calling you, asking you to identify the contact on ship's head at 15 miles at night in the fog. So, good optics are going to be absolutely key here. If you get good early detection, you need a fast-firing, accurate medium gun. Not one that fires conventional rounds that just land in the water, as we've seen the Russians doing with an attack on probably one of their frigates, but using airburst ammunition or possibly even something like flechette rounds. That's another thing the Royal Navy played around with in the 1900s, canister rounds for big guns, for 4-inch, for 12-pounders, 6-inch. The problem with that was at the time that it absolutely trashed the barreling on the weapons. But countering small close-in torpedo boats attacking you, this was seen as a potential solution. Well-coordinated searchlights and or flare illumination. Right? Now, the Russians have been learning, one of the attacks that we'll talk through, they've started to use upper deck lighting searchlights to indicate and direct to close-range guns. Again, not a new concept. In World War II, there was a system called Snowflake. Allied convoys, many ships would be fitted with a fixed flare launching system. And the idea was that if a U-boat got on the surface, got in amongst a convoy at night, All ships would be so fitted would be ordered to launch their flares. It would illuminate the sea, and then the escorts could chase down the U-boat. It's got some disadvantages though. Back then, the problem was you illuminated the convoy, making it a lot easier to target for other U-boats that might be present. And for us today, well, at night, it is going to illuminate you on the sea. But the problem is you're under attack anyway. So, you're having a fucking bad day. I don't think using searchlights is going to make your day any better, any worse, to be honest. Well-coordinated point defense systems. So we're talking guns, we're talking missiles, and we're talking lasers. The close-range guns need good day and night optics. They need to be rapidly engaging multiple targets, and they need to be of a decent caliber. We've seen light machine guns, they're just proving ineffective at stopping these things as far as the Russians are concerned. PKMs, etc., are not cutting it. I would suggest 50 cal minimum. Automatic grenade launchers might be an option. It's odd that some Russian ships we thought were fitted with automatic grenade launchers, but we haven't seen them being used. My feeling is kit shortages ashore. They've had to give up systems like that, and they've been sent to ground units. The lasers, we'll cover a little bit more of that. That's the emergent technology here. That's not going to be the solution, but it's going to be a part solution. Now, your close-in weapon systems like Phalanx are important. The Russians have a number of similar systems, AK-630 being the most common, but that has not proved to be effective either. We know that it has a visual backup aimer capability. There is a pedestal sight that you can use. We've seen it being used. So if you can't get radar lock on the drum tilt fire control system, there is a backup. Certainly you can fire Phalanx in manual. Well, I assume that you can. We used to from the local control position back in my day. But the problem with close-in weapon systems is, if you're talking Phalanx, maybe 70 rounds a second, you're going to burn through the mag really quickly. If you're under attack by 10 USVs, there is going to come a stage where your rounds complete, and then the system is offline for I think maybe 4 minutes. It would take us to do a full reload. That's going to be a significant disadvantage. Could we start looking at short-range missiles specifically for this threat? Well, yeah, the Royal Navy took the single 30mm and fitted it with Martlet on trial, and then probably decided not to buy it. Now, allegedly, one of the problems is with the missile efflux was damaging the superstructure, and there's nothing a first lieutenant hates than a blackened superstructure. Look, it's the 21st century. I'm pretty sure that we could find some way of mitigating that. But a 30mm mount with Martlet mounted alongside it seems to me to be an elegant solution to this problem. Now, if we go back to the medium gun engagements that we've seen, the Russians simply haven't carried them out. So we can surmise from that their detection of these USVs is usually very close range. The reason that we say that is the position of the main gun, be it the 57 or the 76mm guns. The mounts are trained fore and aft on them when we see the footage of the attacks. So the main gun has not been getting into the fight at all. As a rule, they don't seem to have much in the way of supporting air assets. There is a exception to this. We'll put it down in the sources, but at least one, maybe two warships on the horizon did do an early detection of a Ukrainian USV. The main gun was being fired. The helicopter was busy peppering it, probably with PKM fire. And you can see the shell splashes, maybe from a 100mm gun, initially quite short, getting closer and closer. Very brave of the pilot, I must say, because he was in direct line of sight with the mount. So he was lucky not to get a 100mm up his chuff. Apart from one example, use of searchlights to coordinate close range has been utterly lacking. They don't seem to have gone for flares for illumination. As I said, no discernible use of automatic grenade launchers. Ivanovitz, the Tarantul class corvette. She did fire a AK-630 close-in weapon system. Certainly, it was absolutely ineffective. The jamming, as we say, not happening. The darkened ship procedures, for us, it is normal at sea, at sundown, darkened ship, darkened ship. Right? All lights go off apart from nav lights and masthead light. The Russians often do not seem to go for that at all. Now, look, it won't help if you're being stalked by a pack of 6 Magura 5s with decent thermal optics. They're going to see you whether your upper deck lighting is on. But it's an indication of discipline on board. If you're in a war zone and you decide to sail at 5 knots up and down a well-illuminated coast with all your upper deck lighting on, that says to me that is not a well-trained ship's company. The other thing that interestingly they haven't been doing is using picket boats. If you're worried about coming under USV attack and you're tucked in tight to the coastline, get your 2 rigid inflatables out with a couple of guys with AK-47s. It's going to give you a little bit more warning. You could even just fit them out with a dragon light or something like that. It's not going to give you a huge amount of warning, but it's better than absolutely nothing. They won't have night vision equipment because, again, like the grenade launchers, I think all that kind of Gucci kit is being sent ashore. So, close range gunnery, the art of getting rounds on target. In the sources, there is a diagram, and it shows you a basic close range setup. You've got a point defense coordinator, or what we used to call blind, in the ops room. You've got the missile gun director, or what we used to call visual, on the gun direction platform. Blind and visual allocate targets to port and starboard batteries. Port and starboard batteries have a PO in charge, and then individual mounts engage as directed by visual. Gun options and personal experience. What I think would work. Well, powered mounts, like the Royal Navy's twin and single 30mm. The twin is gone. The 30 is still in use. I wasn't a big fan of power traverse and elevation. What I found firing against towed air targets and against towed surface targets is that it lacked the finesse for tracking. Good rate of fire, yeah, good weight on each round of 30mm. For against a USV, 130mm is a kill immediately. The problem was with the optics. If you're looking through a gun sight, it gives you a fairly narrow field of vision. Now, we had a very basic backup, what you might call a battle sight, mounted alongside, and you'll certainly see that in the photographs. It's like the black spider web. But if you're looking for something as small as a USV, you really need eyes wide open. So you're going to be looking over the gun sight, and then you're going to, once you've acquired it, translate your eyeballs, Mark 1, into the optic. You'd be amazed how hard that is. If it's at night and the ship's maneuvering and rolling, it's going to be even more difficult. Now, the manual 20mm Oerlikon 7 Alpha was far better for me. All right, it wasn't stabilized, but it was very easy to adjust onto target. The spider's web gun sight allowed me to sort of initially find my target and then translate it into where I was aiming. It meant acquiring was far easier. It meant tracking was far easier, and it meant that I could engage far quicker. Now, the Gambo 20mm, I had a similar problem I found as a single 30mm. Again, you're having to translate acquiring with your eyeball into the gun sight. And I found that if you lost track of what you were firing at, it's quite difficult to reacquire through that optic sight. So I think the old school World War II spider website is a better option for manually laid guns. But all of this is for naught if you don't have realistic training. All right, as I said, we binned HMS Cambridge. At sea, practice shoots that I conducted were firing at phenomenally realistic targets like flares and the killer tomato, which is a huge radar reflective cube that you would inflate, chuck over the side, and then pop rounds at that. That's not going to cut it. Right? I railed back then in the day against it. How we are still conducting gun X's with these kind of unrealistic targets beats me. It really does. We need realistic live firing against real targets. Yeah, it's going to be expensive creating those targets, but at the end of the day, it's a hell of a lot better than people in survival suits going over the side of a ship that's going under. Gyro stabilizing sights, yeah. The technology is there. Certainly in World War II, Oerlikon 7 Alpha, the Americans had a stabilized gun sight. That would be ideal for manual mounts. We need bigger ammunition capacity. If I got 200 rounds in the box and we're under attack from multiple USVs, I'm going to be burning through that very, very quickly. And again, for a two-man mount like Gambo, once some rounds complete, got to crack open the box at the front, get the belts out, the ready use locker, feed them in, feed them up the feed chute, hook on with a wire, pull it into the breech, and then recock the weapon and then carry on firing. That's going to take time, and time is going to be of essence. Maybe 40 seconds. Yeah, my memory's getting pretty bad now, but I would say between 40 and 50 seconds to carry out a full reload on Gambo. If we can't get night vision equipment for mounts, back to basics, searchlight illumination. Why not? If it helps the gunners, the aimers get on target, then use it. Probably a better option than the upper deck tannoy for direction from the missile gun director visual. Ships are very noisy, and on the gun deck, with the roar of the funnels, other mounts on the ship firing, you'd be surprised how easy it is to struggle to hear what the missile gun director visual is saying as they're trying to get you to shift target. Certainly with the powered mounts, the Royal Navy's gone, I think on the 30mm, it's just remote controlled from the operations room. How they've improved on the finesse of the controls, I don't know. But it occurs to me that for this kind of threat, you want to be able to get the maximum weight of rounds onto the target, so that even if it's just in the gun sight for a second, you get as many rounds on as possible. Thunderbolt, the US Navy solution to kamikaze attacks head on cruisers and battleships, 420mm and 250 cals. That's pretty good. Apparently, you had to be some kind of dwarf to get into the aimer's cabin to the left, I think it was. But 450 cals, that would probably do the trick. Look, the thing is, being a gunner on the upper deck is a real skill. As I say, it's phenomenally loud. The engines roar. You've got a tannoy going off. You've got gunfire. The ship will be heeling as she maneuvers violently. If the ship's in company with others, the aimer has to be aware of his background when he's shooting. You do not want to be putting 50 rounds 20mm Gambo into a accompanying frigate 500 yards on your port beam. You've got to be able to quickly acquire a target, lay the guns, do all the things accounting for lead, deflection, trunnion tilt, all of that good stuff that we covered in depth in Battle of the River Plate, episode 1. And fire reasonable, accurate bursts from the get-go. Our instruction back on course in 95 was single rounds until you're on target, and then go to automatic. I'm going to cut it. These USVs are maneuvering violently. They're coming at you at 20, 30 knots. You need to be rocking and rolling right from the get-go. So as I said, the Victorian and Edwardian Navy put a lot of effort into countering this. Even though back then it was against torpedo boats, and we're really back where they were trying to find solutions. So let's have a look at a couple of case studies. The videos are supplied in the sources. So February the 1st, this is going to be video 1, Tarantul class corvette, Ivanovitz, caught off the coast of Crimea by a number of Magura 5. The attack was detected, but there was seemingly insufficient time or ability to get a 76mm gun into action. That was my first takeaway when I started reviewing the video. The gun remains trained fore and aft. So if you follow me and you look at the video, you'll see the mount pointing forward. There was sufficient time that she was working up to full speed, and she was attempting to maneuver to counter USV threat. There was some light machine gun fire. To be fair, the firing was fairly accurate. It seemed to be good for deflection, but sometimes short on elevation. I don't think they were firing tracer. The AK-630 mounts on a deckhouse aft, I think they both engaged. You can tell from the heat bloom from the barrel, and in the video you clearly see one mount let a burst go, I think at about 27 seconds in. No searchlights or flares used. The AK-630 gun system, the fire control radar, base tilt, which is on the mast, it looks like an upturned soup can. You will see it's trained hard over to the port quarter. So clearly they tried to get some kind of radar lock. I think base tilt and drum tilt radars both have a backup optical sight, but don't quote me on that. First hit was on the transom, on the starboard quarter. That was your mobility kill. No sign of close range weapons on the stern, which was quite surprising. That seems to be something they woke up to. Later attacks, we've seen light machine gun mounts mounted on the stern. Another hit probably on the port quarter. This blew her quarterdeck up and trashed the after deckhouse. Defensive fire promptly ceased. Two more hits port side, both in a main machinery space. This caused massive asymmetric flooding, induced a list to starboard, but those hits on the transom seem to have caused further massive flooding, and even though she was heeled over, she actually seems to have gone down by the stern. And one USV remained for bomb damage assessment. Good positive control throughout. The attack was really well coordinated, and the USVs were not interfered with or called by electronic warfare. So a classic attack on a warship. Another case study, this is going to be video 2, 5th of March 2024, a project 22160, Sergei Kotov was attacked near Feodosia. If you look at the video, the one filmed from a merchant vessel, they herded her out the roadstead. She doesn't seem to have engaged with close range weapons at all to start with. She's nicely darkened ship, but they are running her out of that anchorage with boats on her port and starboard quarter. Then as she gets further out, she does start to shoot, probably from a stern-mounted crew-served weapon. Nicely darkened ship, fair dues. I suspect she tried to clear the roadstead because she wanted freedom to maneuver and probably get her main gun into action. No flares, no searchlights. When she did start engaging, good controlled short bursts initially. Fair one to the aimers. They gave it a good go. No automatic grenade launcher fire. First hit on the transom for a mobility kill. 57mm gun remained trained fore and aft, so never got into the fight. Portside main machinery space hit. After that, defensive fire slackened, and then she was a goner. Both textbook attacks, right? And Western navies need to get ready for this kind of thing. If we're going to continue to operate within hundreds of miles of any coast, these things, in conjunction with uncrewed aerial vessels and anti-ship missiles, and then maybe fighter bomber attacks coming in low, the old days of 24 missiles and a gun on a warship simply isn't going to cut it. Are we making progress on this threat? I hope so. I really do. One of the most fascinating things that's coming is going to be laser defense, directed energy weapons. And because we're re-recording, we'll quickly have a look at this. Is it going to be a game changer, the laser? It's going to be part of the overall suite of defenses for warships. Not new technology. Like, lasers have been around an awful long time. The Royal Navy allegedly deployed one possibly in 1982 down the Falklands, and we did have 2 dazzle sights in 1991 down the Gulf. They were mostly used for range finding though initially. There's lots of different types of laser. There's the electro laser that ionizes a path to the target before it fires an electric current. Apparently that's very much what a taser does. Pulsed energy, that emits an IR pulse, and that creates plasma, increasing plasma on the target. Dazzle sight, these emit visible and invisible light, and predominantly they're good for blinding sensors and eyeballs. I think dazzle sights are still prohibited by a convention. I mean, which escapes me. You're not allowed to blind a pilot flying a fast jet at you, but you can fire missiles with 20 kilograms of high explosive fragmentation warhead against them. One is humane and one isn't. Yeah, okay. Now, a article came out on Blue Sky, and I imagine on Twitter as well, and it featured the Helios laser system, which the American Navy is deploying. And as usual, all the armchair physicists were straight out and said that laser weapons are not a viable weapon system yet, because they don't work in the rain and the fog. No, rain, fog, etc. can cause blooming, right? And what happens is with blooming, it defocuses and disperses the beam that you've created. You can also mess with a laser system by firing off multi-spectrum smoke. We know that the Russians have played with this before on warships. Certainly they stuck with the smoke screen idea, which is why you see that darkened patch on some of their older escorts. I think that they're mixing multi-spectrum smoke with diesel exhaust there. And you've seen it on the bridge. Of course, you've seen the big Russian trucks producing vast smoke clouds of smoke, thinking that that's somehow going to interfere with a missile system like Storm Shadow. Bless. But you can counter blooming. If you use a phased array that uses something called conjugate technology, you use a lower powered laser as a targeting system. You can get a return off a target, then you can amplify that return and essentially create a shockwave effect. What this means is the system basically avoids blooming. It looks for a conductive path, automatically corrects, and then sends the package on its way. A bigger disadvantage is probably the amount of power that you need. But we're seeing viable directed energy weapons now operating in 50 kilowatt region, which we'll talk about in a minute. You can do other things. You can use ablative covers. I think there's been some experiment with ground diamond to produce a thin sort of coating. They seem to think that you can use that with other materials to create a kind of reflective armor. But these weapon systems are here. Right. What's a good example? Well, Dragonfire. That's a UK project. It uses something called a beam director. So if you have a look at the mount, and again, there's a picture of it in the sources, the beam director's got 3 apertures. So the first is for detecting targets. The second provides target classification. And the third is actually your targeting system. Now, reading an interview about this with one of the developers, blooming didn't come up as one of their biggest challenges. A challenge, but not the bigger one. And MDBA, who are in the partnership, say maintaining track of the target as you fire at it and it heats up has been a considerable problem. I think the way they get around it is they map a return from the target and they modify the beam even as it moves through the atmosphere. So rather than going for brute force power, they're looking to work around this issue with software. Now, Dragonfire is only in the 50 kilowatt range. The US Helios system, I think it's anything up to 120 kilowatts. And the next version will be 300 kilowatt plus. That's under development, and that's going to be able to target anti-ship missiles, aircraft, etc., etc. What's the big advantage of this? Well, as long as you have power and cooling, it's inexhaustible. Remember what I said, a phalanx system, you're going to blow through the magazine really quickly. A Gambo 20mm, you're going to have to blow through your ammunition rapidly, and that mount is going to be offline until you reload. These things will carry out very rapid 1-2 second engagements. They'll be able to shift target rapidly. fully automatic, and they can be integrated into the ship's command system. They're also, think about crewing, right? Even a 20 mil is a 2-man crew. If I've got 4 20 mil mounts on the ship, that's 8 crew. But I can't keep them up 24/7, 365 days a year. So either I face in defense watches, 50% readiness, 50% manning, having 1 crew per 2 weapons, or I need 16, 8 on watch, 8 off watch. The other issue is ships weren't, up until recently, ships weren't really designed to take all these close-in weapon systems. And certainly with lasers, whilst the power issue is being catered for, and I know that Royal Navy warships, Type 45s and the aircraft carriers, they had built-in redundancy for this in anticipation of needing more power. So there is going to be room for improving generator capacity. Older ships, there is going to be a finite limit to how much power you're going to be able to provide to the weapon system, but no crew. If it's fully automatic, less personnel on the upper deck. So that's your brief introduction to close range gunnery. If you want to know more about gunnery, as I said, what you want to do is have a look at Battle of River Plate Part 1, where we got super nerdy, not into shooting at aircraft, but the problems with shooting at surface contacts. And certainly a lot of that, deflection lead, trunnion tilt, spotting, all of those things are going to be applicable to the USV threat. It's all about getting rounds on target quickly. We are going to lose ships to this threat. It is cheap. They are versatile. They are being able to carry more and more standoff weapon systems, and they're not going to be restricted to high-end operators. They're going to be in the hands of people like the Houthis and every other swinging dick terrorist organization that can bring one together. So we need to get a grip of this. Are we? As I say, I don't know, but I certainly hope so. So that concludes today's lesson, kids. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's given you an idea from the point of view of a former close range gunner. Like and subscribe to the podcast. If you've got any further questions or any suggestions what you'd like to cover us to cover in future, please drop us a line. Thanks a lot for listening, team.